We're going to get started here to reward those who are on time. Welcome, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. My name's Erin Sikorsky, and I am the director of the Center for Climate and Security, a research institute based in Washington, D.C. And really glad that all of you have chosen to join us for this webinar on the security considerations of climate change and artificial intelligence this morning. We've got a really good conversation lined up for you all with some fantastic speakers. I'm going to provide just a few introductory remarks, and then we'll get into the meat of our conversation. Um, so, for those of you who don't know, the Center for Climate and Security is a research institute based in Washington, D.C., that looks at how climate change is reshaping the national security landscape and then examines what policymakers, practitioners, governments around the world need to do about it. And we look at this from a pretty broad perspective, right? Everything from human security concerns to food and water, to military concerns, to geopolitical challenges that arise from climate change and the responses to climate change. And it's increasingly difficult to have that conversation without examining artificial intelligence, both from an opportunities perspective, right? What are the new tools and capabilities that AI may provide to help manage some of these challenges, but also from a risks perspective, right? Where might AI exacerbate climate security risks? And so I'm really pleased today that we have two of the best experts on this topic together to answer some of those questions and discuss these challenges. One of my favorite things about my job, frankly, is when I read brilliant things by brilliant people, I can then reach out to them and ask them to come join me in conversation. And so I'm really glad that we have Dr. Costa Samaras and Dr. Kyung-Mi Kim here with us today for this discussion. Before I introduce them, though, just real briefly, I want to highlight that the Center for Climate and Security sits within a broader organization called the Council on Strategic Risks. CCS was first, and then CSR grew out of it as we recognized that there was a broader scope of risks that we needed to be able to look at. And the job of CSR is to anticipate, analyze, and reduce risk broadly by building security and stability in a world defined by overlapping threats. I know that's a very broad definition, but I bring it up because this webinar today on AI and climate is just the first of a series that we're doing on issues across what CSR works on. So some colleagues from the Converging Risks Lab will be hosting another webinar in March that's looking at AI and cognition. And then our Nolan Center, which looks at strategic weapons, will also be joining the conversation later this year with some discussions on AI and biosecurity threats. So just flagging that for everyone that this will be an ongoing conversation within our organization, and I hope you can join us for these. So, all right, enough from me. Very briefly, I'm going to introduce our two panelists and then turn it over to them for their opening remarks. First, we'll hear from Dr. Costa Samaras, who is the director of Carnegie Mellon University's Scott Institute for Energy Innovation and the trustee professor of civil and environmental engineering. From 2021 to 2024, he served in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where he was the principal assistant director for energy, OSTP chief advisor for energy policy, and then OST chief advisor for the clean energy transition. So he was very busy doing great work in the White House. And before my time at CCS, I know he's written some great papers with my colleagues here. And so I encourage you to go deep in the archives and check those out because they're excellent. After Costa, we'll hear from Dr. Kyung-Mi Kim, who is associated with two of my favorite institutions in Sweden. She's an associate senior lecturer of political science at the Swedish Defense University. She's also an associate researcher at SIPRI, or the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which is one of the homes of some of the best climate security analysis in Europe. Her research interests include environmental politics and climate security. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to you, Costa, to kick things off.
Thank you so much, Erin, and to the center and to everyone joining. Looking forward to our discussion today. I'm going to start with some brief introductory slides to set the scene for us. Does that look okay? Wonderful. When we think about power, I want you to think about the Hoover Dam. I want you to think about how big the Hoover Dam is. So the Hoover Dam is 2 gigawatts of power capacity at full power. This is the XAI data center outside of Memphis, and it's scaling up to 1 gigawatt, and with potential to be up to 2 gigawatts, and we'll see if that materializes. But when you hear about a 1 gigawatt data center, you think about it as half of a Hoover Dam. And what's important for us to understand here is that AI is not just an energy story, it's not just a climate story, it's the kind of the foundation of the next 2 decades of energy, economic, security, environmental outcomes. And the reason is the grid is the foundational infrastructure of this century, but the grid is old and the grid is vulnerable, and electricity prices are growing. And a lot of that
Ooh, I think we may have lost you, Pasta,
here.
for a second. Sorry, your
We lost me
audio
for a
cut
second.
out. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. All right,
Okay.
I'm going to share again. Okay, electricity is the security infrastructure of this century, and it's vulnerable, it's aged, and the prices are growing. And AI is the kind of the near-term thing that we're thinking about, but the way that we handle AI will affect all of the capabilities and infrastructure that we need for both energy, climate, and economic security. And there's a great potential to improve the outcomes that we want with AI, but these will not happen on their own, and they require focused policy and some public-private partnerships. So the way I like to think about this problem was outlined by some colleagues in a paper a few years ago. And you kind of think about the story right now in AI is we hear about data centers, and data centers are very important. They are the building blocks of the AI capabilities and impacts. And you think about data centers in the center of this graphic, kind of in the circle. But really, what AI does is affect all the ways that we interact with infrastructure, our electricity infrastructure, our transportation, our industrial infrastructure, and our security infrastructure. And because in the United States, the electricity system and the commercial energy grids power nearly all of our domestic military capabilities and installations, the way that AI interacts with those infrastructure and installations affect our capabilities both here and abroad. And then one more ripple to the outside of this graph is how does AI affect the where people live, the ways they interact with infrastructure, the capabilities that we have in technology and weapon systems, and the ways that interacts with our climate and our climate resilience of infrastructure. So I'll try to frame a couple of these issues, and then we're looking forward to the discussion. So for data centers in the United States, the entire internet, AI, Netflix, email, everything. Uh, we have energy use on the vertical axis and then time on the bottom. And really from the last decade, internet use went up a lot and energy use only went up a little. And that's because the industry drove massive efficiencies inside the data center. But then kind of in the last few years, something broke. And the capabilities of large language models and scientific computing, image classification, and other AI capabilities grew very, very rapidly and improved such that the commercial demand for these capabilities started to rapidly increase. And so now all the Internet of data centers consumes about 4 to 5% of US electricity demand. And the projections of where it could go are wide ranging, but we know it's likely higher than we are now. And it could grow very, very rapidly because these are like little cities that show up and uh, uh, consume steel mill or larger levels of power demand. In Virginia, where we have a locus of government and defense activity, it is the epicenter of global data center demand. And this is a very localized challenge, but it's spreading to many, many regions of the country and many parts of the world of high electricity use from data centers. And then with that electricity use comes fossil-fired backup. So this is again in Tennessee, and those red dots are kind of flames from generators. And in some areas that have water stress, you have challenges with water consumption. But I want to stress AI and data centers are really only part of our electrified future. And we will need to electrify homes and businesses and many factories and buildings and vehicles. And if we don't get AI right, we won't be able to get these other parts right that affect our climate and economic security. So we need a bunch of new clean supply. We need benchmarks and kind of miles per gallon level efficiencies and open information. But we also need a resilient and reinvested electricity infrastructure with the flexibility to operate in this new environment. And it's very important that we are able to protect communities from the risk of rising prices and emissions and local impacts. But I want to also stress we need demonstrated use cases of the positive outcomes of AI. And there's a lot of opportunity with AI to improve resilience and efficiency and transportation. We need to kick the tires, see the data, and guide policy and incentive outcomes towards those types of use cases. And I want to stress this will not happen on its own. It does require continuous interactions between government, industry, and the public. And that kind of last two slides to wrap up here is that we know we've at the center you all have worked for a long time on this cascading threats of climate hazards, risk, vulnerability, and exposure, and what that means for society and infrastructure. And it's important to remember that our defense infrastructure, our societal infrastructure is exposed to multiple climate threats, often cascading climate threats at the same time. And nearly all of our infrastructure is not designed for the types of hazards that they will experience now and that they will experience over the next several decades. And so it's very important that we connect people working in infrastructure to people working in policy, to folks that are working in governance, to ensure that the capabilities that we have in our defense and societal infrastructure are maintained as climate threats and hazards continue to increase. So my colleagues in the White House introduced a AI Bill of Rights in 2022 that was foundational to argue for the rights of people in the age of AI. And I want to humbly add an amendment to that AI Bill of Rights for energy and climate and security. And these types of principles that I have on the screen, making sure that local impacts are minimized or eliminated, don't raise people's energy bills, making sure that there's reliability and flexibility and resilience, and also reinvest in our infrastructure. These are the types of outcomes and principles that we as civil society can interact with policymakers and with industry to ensure that we get the type of outcomes we want that both increase our domestic economic and climate security, but also make sure that we are reducing impacts on communities and ultimately getting to zero emissions. I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to a discussion.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Casa. You gave us a lot. I think I've already scribbled down many questions for the conversation. So let's turn it over to Dr. Kim.
Thanks so much, Erin, for the invitation, and also, yeah, really nice to be here. And yeah, I could have listened to your. It felt like a mini lecture, Professor Samaras could have like listened to it for longer. It was really a good overview, and I will talk about something a bit more specific than the overall energy security, but it's kind of a specific element of aspect of climate security, I would say. It's this field of climate peace security and how the AI can potentially offer help to look at this intertwined challenge. So yeah, my name is Kyungmi, and yeah, I'm currently sitting in Stockholm. So it's about 3:30 right now, and it's snowing. And I heard that it was quite cold in the US as well. So maybe we can also feel this chill in the air while yeah, you can imagine this northern hemisphere or this European winters are a bit longer, and this is maybe they also talk about having data centers and whatnot. So yeah, as Erin talked about me being at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. So there we work on a climate change and risk as a part of a program there, and we have colleagues working on different aspects of connecting climate peace security. So they look at the UN Security Council and they look at different intersections of security, climate change, and how they can also uh, becoming the pathway to peace building, which is now, I think, the space where this discussion has I would say it has shrunk over last few years, and I think that we need to also look at different solutions to address the challenges in the field. So this report that I did together with Vincent Bulani, who is an expert in AI and automated weapons systems. So he works more on the AI and defense, and I'm working on the climate change the field. So we wrote this report together to look at how AI can offer some more solutions to climate security. So this paper is grounded in the perspective that climate risk can translate into security risk through interacting with the human and societal vulnerability. So it's basically adapting this human security aspect, broadening from the national security, and we think that climate change has an indirect impact on various types of insecurity. And we also theorize insecurity a bit more broadly, just than the armed conflict and interstate conflict. So we look at also the violent conflict, social conflict, protest, different kind of grievances resulting in a kind of social tensions and etc. And also the intercommunal violence is part of our theoretical framework. And we also focus on different kind of social, political, and also the development context into the account. So these factors influence how climate change can translate into security risks. So we also very much in the same page with the scholars who look at climate change as the security risks rather than threats. So rather than there is a sort of enemy to fight against, it is a systematic measures to reduce the risk that we can connect the climate change to various types of insecurity. And in this report, so it's a quite a long read. So so it does look at three main entry points that AI can be used of, and here we use the term AI in a very in a very narrow sense. So it's not the AI as the AI as that's going into the phones and integrated into various technology. It's only focusing on AI-driven tools or AI-powered systems. So it's a specific tool that uses AI for addressing these challenges. So here we look at how AI can help us to better understand climate or related hazards and how it can manage different vulnerabilities, that's the social economic vulnerabilities in the middle circle there, or it can help with this direct conflict issues like the peace building, and also we basically focused on how it can detect climate-related grievances and tensions early on, and leading to fast response. And yeah, so these key potentials are detailed in the report, but it's drawing on the examples that exist. So I think that's in that sense, it's quite limited because we still don't have full explorations of how this technology can really contribute to these different challenges that we face in climate peace security. But I mean, definitely there are some promising areas in detection of the hazard through advanced modeling. I think a lot of the scientists are already using it in their research and putting out work, the complex pictures that we now be able to process in the disaster management, for example. So that definitely presents a promising picture. But I think this the decreasing the development assistance, also the climate financing, that also makes it difficult for the AI to really concretely providing benefits to address the social economic vulnerabilities that can be exacerbated by the climate change. So I think that's where I also see the limitations. It's not just that the tools are so great, but that's we also need the human resources to follow up with this information. But then, yeah, there are some unintended consequences and risks that we also identified in the process, which kind of are aligned with what we have in terms of these risks and unintended consequences of climate action and also climate security focused interventions. Like, for example, I mean, the misinformation and disinformation. This is a serious challenge. I have colleagues at the Swedish Defense University that work on this democratic resilience against disinformation, and they basically have this tentative conclusion that this volume of information is a challenge. And this is definitely an issue during climate-related disaster phase when you have to sort different information that really need to point to the right response, and this information challenge will get deepened because of this AI. But that's I guess that's less related to the AI related tools. And I think the development of the AI related tools targeting to address this climate related risks, I mean, it's still unintendedly further marginalized social groups because this development of the tools are it can be more inclusive than right now. And I have not really found good examples of how this participatory approaches and more inclusive uh, making of these tools can be done yet. So I think maybe this is in making, but so far I haven't seen much of this in practice. And then, of course, the dealing with uncertainties within uncertainties. I think the data and a lot of the AI generated knowledge and the results are telling us, I mean, how we can navigate our uncertainty. However, this is still challenging in a way that we can be sure with this information. I think there is a high still level of uncertainty that we still have to work with. And of course, with the policymakers, this is a challenge when they also don't have the clear mandates. And we identify this with the interviews with some experts that they have a challenge to understand. So, okay, if it's a probability of 60%, is that really good to intervene, or is that needs to be higher? I think this threshold of like when do we need to intervene with certain information with again uncertainty it's a challenge. And of course there's a geopolitical tensions. I think the Professor Mars had a map of different data centers on the globe. There's a clear division between which countries have this technical capacity and do not. So I think this is something that we need to work with as also the tension across Atlantic is rising and etc. Yeah. So yeah, we can now start the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it was you guys complemented each other nicely because one of the things I appreciated in Costa, your remarks is that we need to really focus on what are the demonstrated use cases, right? We need to kick the tires. And I think, Dr. Kim, you gave us a few examples of potential use cases in a climate, peace, and security context that are worth exploring more. Like I said, I have a few questions for you all for discussion, but I'll encourage the audience, please start putting questions into the Q&A box as well. I'm sure you all know the Zoom drill by now, and I will take a look at those and read some of them for our panelists. But I want to start back with you, Costa, because one of your headlines on your slide really struck a note with me that you made the point that AI and energy choices today determine the path for the next 2 decades. And we talk about that a lot in the climate security world, right? Investments today will really shape your path and your choices going forward. But that's often a really hard message to convey to policymakers, right? To get them to act for that kind of long-term path. And so, given your role in the White House and how you worked on these topics, what, how do you find conveying that to policymakers, or what works in trying to make that case that they really need to focus on the long term when making today's decisions about AI and energy?
I think it framed in the lens of capability in the defense world, framed the lens of capabilities and ensuring that the capabilities that we're paying for today are maintained and enhanced over time as threats change and as climate impacts escalate. For many U.S. federal decision makers, the need for long-term thinking is often baked into statute. There are parts of the National Defense Authorization Act that require defense infrastructure to have a life cycle, long-term cost value to taxpayers and to the government. And one could take that and look at it from a climate perspective and making sure that because most, if not all, federal infrastructure is self-insured, meaning when there's a disaster, we don't call an insurance company. The taxpayers are on the hook for rebuilding that infrastructure. Then for even from a purely economic perspective, maximizing the value and minimizing the outlay from taxpayers requires a long-term perspective to make sure that we're uh, building both physical and societal infrastructure to withstand these types of threats. Uh, I think that most most policymakers want to understand where the impact is that they can have in the time that they're in their space. But a lot of times when we're talking about climate and physical infrastructure, that extends way beyond the political tenure of any appointees or electeds. However, they do want to make sure that they have a legacy of building a strong foundation for our peace and security. And so there are opportunities to make the case on how climate and security investments today, even if they pay off over many, many decades, is in the interest of today's policymakers, and it's 100% in the interest of the American public.
Yeah, that's great. Kyung-mi, I have a similar question for you. And when you engage with policy actors who work on climate peace and security, what kind of conversations are you having with them about AR? Are they excited about the potential? Are they worried about the risk? Kind of like, are they asking good questions? Do they need kind of like a baseline understanding? What's your experience?
Well, I have to say, I'm also not an AI expert as a computer
Sure.
scientist. So this is something that I find it quite interesting, this imagination
Hmm.
about the technology and what it can do. It is really interesting to capture. When I did the interview-based study about the water negotiations and the AI, it was fascinating to hear different kinds of imaginations on what technology can do, what the AI can do. For basically, for some policymakers, this is going to be a tool that will tell them how much water is going to be needed for them, how much the the change is going to happen, and that was kind of treated as this crystal ball, which I found it quite fascinating because some of the hydrologists who I spoke to, they were like, oh, we already can do these calculations with the information we already have. You don't need the AI to actually do this. But it's about this techno optimism that I find it really fascinating and slightly concerning in a sense that we might not really take this challenges so seriously now and make the investments on disaster risk reduction, I mean climate adaptation, also the mitigation efforts. Instead of doing this, we are sort of dreaming that there will be this fantastic tool that will just solve the issue. I think that's a real risk that I see uh, when I had this conversation with the policymakers. And I actually think that a lot of the advanced economies, because now I'm working on this like case study of climate policy and AI in intersection and together with a colleague at Linköping University. And this is also quite interesting that a lot of the contradictory ideas are in this AI policy that's combined with the climate action. They think that AI can be sustainable, AI can be frugal. Like for example, the French talks about the frugal AI. It has to be sustainable and ecologically sound. But at the same time, they think that this is going to be their way to address climate change without having concrete steps to reduce the ecological footprint of the AI. So I think this is a good idea, but I mean, there are lots of contradictions within the state policy and also the policymakers, their own narratives about AI.
Hmm. Costa, I saw you nodding your head along with some things that Kyung-mi was saying. Do you want to jump in on this on kind of the magic solving of problems through AI in some people's heads, or do you encounter that, and how do we manage that?
What Dr. Kim was saying is spot on, and this is the role that we in the research community and the policy community can demand, which is, sh kick the tires, show me the results, and put in the actual steps that's going to take place, rather than point to a potential imagined techno future that just materializes. That's not how it works. We need actual physical stuff to happen, and there's amazing potential with AI computations for improving weather predictions and helping climate models and understanding energy use and opportunities for reforestation. And so there are these real opportunities, and I don't want to dismiss those. And I think that we should be guiding the incentives towards using AI and leveraging AI and then demonstrating what it can do, rather than imagine and hope that it's just going to do it for us.
Yeah. Do either of you, in the work that you've done in this space, do you have examples where you see either groups of policymakers and researchers coming together and really getting that process right? Like models that you would point to say, hey, that's how we should do this? I take
I
that
mean,
as a no.
in
Or you
other, oh, sorry. Um,
no, no, go ahead, go ahead.
the AI is not the first emerging technology that policymakers have had
Mm,
to deal with. From nano to bio to robotics, to nuclear and other biological threats. Folks there's established infrastructure across many different parts of civil society and the federal government that can think through and work through these types of new and emerging challenges, and guiding towards the best benefits. I think one of the challenges now is that, because in the United States, AI is driving a large part of the current capital investment in infrastructure and in the energy infrastructure, that it's the industry is ahead of the policymakers. And it's our job
mm.
as researchers and policy to ensure that we catch up.
Maybe I can speak about some of these nonprofit foundations and what they're doing.
Mm,
I think a lot of these foundations are exploring sort of this, the positive use of AI for disaster response, and also just developing the model that can be more accurately representing the actual society and also how humans behave. So for example, the one AI foundation that's looking into how the algorithms can be less zero sum and more cooperative. For example, so there are different efforts to find the technology to really help with peace building and also encouraging cooperation and so on. But I also find it quite difficult to see these efforts are like long term and sustained like over the years, because I was trying to really find these examples when I was writing this report in 2023. I think I went through every single like foundation website to like see any engagement, and they do seem to like have one-off sort of, the dashboard was created for a specific, for example, the hurricane event. I think I can't remember which hurricane in the US, but yeah, it was designed for that, and then it didn't really continue, for example. So a lot of this digital infrastructure or these tools also need to be sustained over time to be able to show like how they can really devolve and evolve and develop and evolve to help the larger society. So I think, yeah, some of that seems to be lacking. But I mean, this Dutch government has the water peace security example. That's a platform. They also work with this World Resource Institute in the DC. So they have a lot of this data driven uh, like global dashboards of like, showing different type of water scarcity at the different spatial level, and they also combine that with the conflict and the political instability layers. So you can sort of use these maps to understand so where it could be this next complex emergencies coming up. So I think those efforts at the global level seems to be quite popular now in among the policymakers. And I think the question there also, when I spoke to the people who work on this initiative, is that how this can help the policymakers to do something. So it's really fantastic as an information project, but I mean, what does it actually do? I think that's also something that that needs to be explored further.
Great. No, thank you both. Well, we have a ton of questions already in the Q&A, so I think I'm going to go there now to make sure we have time. We've got about 25 minutes left to answer questions from folks. There are a lot of questions, and I had some too around perceived trade-offs, right, between the energy and water demand for data centers and for use of AI versus the benefits, and whether there are different ways to measure trade-offs depending on what type of AI you're talking about, right? Sometimes we use AI very generically. We mean everything from LLMs to machine learning to generative video, right? So how would you think about, that's a question for both of you, comparing in terms of energy water costs, right, of different types of AI versus potential benefits for climate security, resilience, social goods? Sometimes it seems like the downsides of one kind of AI are defended on the basis of the benefits of different types of AI, right? And so how do you think about that? Uh, Maybe Costa, will start with you.
Yeah, this is important in the broader discussion. We basically lump machine learning, video, chatbots, kind of back end deep analysis and deep research and other image classification, remote sensing. All of it fall automation. Like all of it falls into a broader AI bucket. And the question was, can we? Uh, I think is a very important one. How do we know what we're getting with these trade-offs? I mean, we do
Mhm.
climate modeling that requires lots of computational power. We make all types of products that use energy and create emissions. Our objective in that system is to get energy as most efficient as possible and get emissions to zero. But right now, we need to be thinking about what we're getting, not just right now, but what we could get and how do we drive to those outcomes. So I think it's important to understand the kind of the impacts of single use cases now. I'm very skeptical about the trying to quantify the environmental impact of a single chatbot query with several levels of decimal places. That I think that's the wrong question. I don't think we can even get to that level of precision. I think what we need to do is how do we get to a climate safe future with AI being pervasive in society or as it's happening right now, and minimizing water use, minimizing emissions, getting emissions to zero, and maximizing efficiency, and also ensuring that there are opportunities to drive both climate resilience and climate mitigation are the types of organizing principles that I think we should be policymakers should be focused on.
That's great. Yeah, making sure we're asking the right questions, right? Moving in the right direction. Yeah. Chun-Mi, did you have anything you want to add on that? No. Okay. All right. Um, there are a couple other questions related to data inputs, and I know this is something you've written about, Kyung-Mi, is like the systems are only as good as the data we can put in, and in many developing countries or conflict afflicted countries, right, the data we have is not great. And so if you say you can use AI tools to measure climate security risks or create early warning systems, if you don't have good data, you're not going to get anywhere. Do you have thoughts on how we overcome some of those challenges, how we might collect better data, how we can move forward there?
Yeah, thanks for raising the question. I mean, definitely there's some uh, big gap between like when it comes to conflict and insecurity, this fragile and conflict affected countries definitely suffer from this data deficit. Because we also still gather a lot of this social science and political data at the country level, and it becomes this aggregated number, and that doesn't really explain how specific regions in, like for example in Sahel, they suffer water scarcity, and that translate into security risks because of the direct impact on their livelihood and this violent environment that they live in. So in a way, this more data will really help us to also understand the realities. But how do we really get to this everyday struggles and lived experience of people on the ground? I mean, I think there is probably something that AI can help, in a sense that AI or the technology or this digital means that we have, because now the people do use mobile phones for also getting into the weather reports and getting warnings and etc. So I think that there is some information channel there that we can also be used to document the insecurity. But I think the best work is still done by all the human researchers and the research collaborators in the field who basically can tell this embodied experience of how this affects people. And also people are different because of their gender, their age, their livelihoods, and all sorts of different human factors. I think this complexity might still be quite difficult for this quantified and measures to really all come together. So I think in a way we still need more human understanding. I was really um, of course the quite mentally affected, but not the financially affected, but by this USAID and all this great work that they were doing for actually collecting this type of grounded data that they were providing to the rest of the world in a sense. I think this famine early warning the program was largely USAID funded. So I don't know what happened to that. I mean, for example, like so there are so many examples that we actually lost a lot of these connections to the field. I think that's a bit of a struggle. But I think the remote sensing data, for example, it can also be really helpful to document some of the ecological human change that's usually combined in this type of this remote sensing data. I think there could be also more creative ways to incorporate this in our understanding.
Great. Costa, do you have anything to add on the data, the inputs?
I think as a real need for both established practitioners and emerging early career professionals to everybody does not need to be an expert on AI, but we do need to understand what it can and cannot do so that when folks are in positions of decision-making authority, they're not presented with research or a product from externally that says, I've used AI and don't worry about the details and here's the answer. And I think we need to make sure that we are guiding towards open methods, open weights, and open data, so that we can have trust in the outcomes that for any of the methods that we're using with AI or anything else. And so the AI will only help if, as Dr. Kim said, if the original input data is of value. And we need to make sure that our policymakers are not waving a magic wand and saying, AI told me to do this or AI made this better without understanding what's underneath the hood.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think there are a lot of co-benefits to building stronger um, data awareness, scientific literacy, right, among policymakers, among the national security community. That's something we talk a lot about in the climate security spaces. You don't need a bunch of climate scientists to join the CIA, but you need people at CIA to know how to talk to climate scientists, right? And it's the same, I think, with AI. Is you need a baseline of solid understanding so you can ask the right questions and build trust and understand what you're getting, not just taking it at face value. Um, so there are a couple different questions here looking for more concrete examples. I think there's some skepticism in the audience that AI can help with climate at all, or with climate peace and security. So maybe I'll ask both of you to give a couple of kind of your favorite examples of places where you see AI being promising for tackling some climate risk or climate security risk broadly. So I'll let either one who wants to jump in and go.
Maybe I can start, but this is not really specific to AI. So I have to also draw a line that this is the just general use of technology that helps with this type of incidences. So for example, I think in Bangladesh, it's really heavily affected by flooding. And one of the best ways to actually see where the disaster affected area is located is not through the any kind of modeling or like it's just really a matter of time that requires intervention. So then you can look at the where the data, sorry, the mobile the telephone towers are receiving signals. And so this type of also the metadata coming from the communication technology is an indicator for where are people where people fleeing from where to where. So that's a for example that where the type of detection technology can be helpful in like actually identifying the hotspot during disaster situations that's related to climate change. And another kind of a positive example that I stumble on is the sort of this international water conflict in making that's sort of being mitigated due to the machine learning and the near real time the water level detection in Vietnam and China. Sorry, the Vietnamese and the Chinese context. So they have a shared river in the northern Vietnam, so it's highly flood prone. And they have an agreement to share information, but the Chinese have the upstream and Vietnamese have the downstream. They both have hydropowers all over the river and its tributaries. But the Chinese have to share data with Vietnam, but they don't have the specific clause how often they need to share the data. But during the flood situation, every hour, every minute is precious. You need to tell them exactly when they open the flood, open the dam sluice, then they need to inform the downstream country. But that's not written in the agreement, so they do not have this obligation legally. So Vietnamese have found a way to actually detect the water flow from upstream by using this machine learning based satellite image detecting models that they have developed. So Vietnam is actually one of the countries that I've seen that's really interesting for this emerging economy. They really invest a lot in machine learning, the AI-based science efforts. So a lot of their universities are producing lots of AI-related publications in water and agriculture sector in particular. So they are trying to respond to this flood risk instead of challenging China internationally, calling them for the more data, they're actually just trying to compensate by using their own technology to reduce the risk and save lives. So those are the two examples that I have.
Great. Casa?
So agree on the use of open sourcing of remote sensing for both verification of actions that were taken and then anticipation of challenges in water or drought or heat. The very concrete one that is worth exploring is how AI and really machine learning affect the electricity sector and how we can improve weather forecasting and integration of renewables like solar and wind by understanding both not just a day ahead weather patterns but the way that society uses energy in very predictable patterns and incorporating both the societal energy use, the transportation energy use, day ahead weather, and the electricity sector to better incorporate renewables. Now, I would love to see that demonstrated on a wider scale, and then really cascade down to how do we ensure that we can use machine learning to detect faults and reroute power and make sure that the power comes back on after a big storm. And so this is where I really think it's worth a focused effort from researchers both here and around the world to say this is the actual results of both natural and field experiments of using AI, and here's what we got from it.
That's great because I mean, what you're talking about is building resilience, right, in the system. And as climate hazards continue to intensify, right, we know even if we cut all emissions tomorrow, we're facing increasing extreme weather events. If there are opportunities to build resilience in the system, leveraging AI, let's figure that out and make sure we know what we're doing. I think we have time for a couple more questions here. There are a couple questions related to disinformation. Where do you worry about AI contributing to disinformation vis-a-vis climate and climate security? And also, do we need to worry about when we're talking about the data that goes into AI? systems? Oh, do we need to worry about false information or bad actors trying to manipulate the information going into these systems to undermine resilience other places? So either one of you, if you have thoughts on the disinformation nexus.
Okay, maybe I'll take it away. So I have some colleagues at my department who are working on narratives and how that also includes sorry, these political narratives and also these geopolitical narratives in particular. So because I'm at the Swedish Defense University, lots of colleagues are interested in Russian and that the far right narratives also about the world and world order, and they also always slip in this climate change and what it is in this broader narratives, and it's always about, oh, it is very confusing, it is very like yeah, is a lot of this denial of climate change is anything that exists. So a lot of this is being reproduced also by a lot of this chatbots and becoming part of this conservative narrative. So I don't want to make it into too much of a political discussion here, but I mean it is definitely a factor that the bottom-up support for climate action and also just the recognizing this connection is quite important. But I think we have also a lot of this fact-checking done by so for example the Swedish national television has the fact-checking section, like every news every day they have like, oh, let's fact check, is this AI or not? So they have this national TV sort of segments, it talks about it every day. So I think in a way people are aware of, I mean, this different disinformation, people are also becoming more resilient to it in a way that, oh, I thought it was real, but I also can recognize it's not. And so I think we are sort of building this public awareness, but at the same time, I think it's very easy to amplify certain information that without even knowing. So I think maybe the bigger issue is maybe the misinformation than disinformation, because misinformation, in a sense, that it's unintended. You don't know what is correct, and this also can become an issue that, yeah, some of the experts that I interviewed in the past that were talking about this. Uh, Maybe the misinformation, in a sense, that's like just amplifying this misconception about for example like forest fires. Yeah, that, I mean, it could be, I mean, we always talk about uncertainties in science, and I think that's we are quite comfortable with it. I mean, at the university, like everyone like will just be quite nuanced with like linking that directly with climate change always. But I mean, in a way, it's yeah, it can become difficult to also communicate. People always think that there is no truth. Everything is confusing, so there's no sense of like what we can say or not. Sorry, very meandering answer to your question, Costas.
No, no problem. Costa?
You know, for folks in the climate community, there have been several decades of both focused and unfocused attacks on truth and attacks on science, attacks on the outcomes, because the outcomes make either folks uncomfortable or affect their financial interest. Social media and the internet have only reduced those costs for state, non-state actors and others to try to sow division and amplify misinformation to reduce both trust, truth, and democracy. The hope that I do get is that if you look back kind of the 20 years ago from and to now, the trust in climate science and the kind of the call for climate action has gotten stronger over that time, even as the weaponization of information to just to kind of degrade trust in civil society has also gotten stronger. So there is an opportunity, one, to make sure that we are doing the best available science and communicating that in ways that people can understand in their daily lives, but two, building the types of institutions and resilient institutions that can weather these types of deliberate and incursions.
Great. Thank you. And I mean, I think both of your answers highlighted that this isn't just an AI problem, right? It's broader than that, and AI can maybe amplify some of these challenges, but it's been with us for a while, and it's something we need to manage. Well, the last question I'm going to ask both of you. We have a lot of students actually who've joined us and had a lot of questions in the Q&A. And since you're at Carnegie Mellon and you're at the Swedish Defense University, I want like if you had one piece of advice for someone who's looking to enter, kind of the policy world, working on climate security, what would you recommend for them to focus on or get smart or think about vis-a-vis AI, for them to be prepared to manage these issues going forward? Me, can I put
Maybe I
you on
can
the spot?
begin.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks for this point. I want to echo what Professor Samaras just said earlier about really asking for the like verification and evidence. I think that is something that I think we can really like stand by. I mean, I'm sure if you're going into the policy like sector now, I think you are very much likely to be positioned to like manage some projects that's supporting AI driven approach or the yeah, like somehow involving AI in your intervention. I think then you I mean I think being excited is okay. I think we should all be excited about something, but yeah, I mean it's just understanding like what is specifically is it going to really do and how is it going to affect the end users I mean the communities, different kind of government authorities at different levels. I think there are many things to be answered, but I think it's often um, obscured by the cool technology and something really, the new and I mean, those things that makes us excited. I mean, that's still good, but we still need to think about the impact of this interventions, technology, and the tools. So just don't forget about people and who's going to be, end up being affected.
Great.
Total agreement. And, just as climate affects everything, AI and digitization has different aspects to everybody's lives in different parts of their both personal and professional life. So we all work in climate and we all work in digitization, whether we know it or not. And preparing yourselves in your specialization while also getting a broader systems view is paramount. And so, not everybody needs to be an LLM coder, but they need to understand how those types of information affect the space in your life that is important and the space of those who are around you. Uh, at Carnegie Mellon, I will say I teach a course. I designed a course called AI Engineering and Policy for Climate Mitigation and Resilience. And the objective is not to teach folks how to create a neural network or generate an LLM. It's what do these tools do? How do we use them? How shouldn't we use them? And what are the risks and benefits of both in the environment and society of doing these types of things? So seek out those types of opportunities in traditional, professional, or online education to stay current as this landscape evolves quickly. And you're able to add to the conversation across any stage of your career by going deeper and understanding and how it affects you and the people that you care about.
Wonderful. I think I would very much like to be able to audit that course. Maybe I'll drive up to Pittsburgh. But it sounds great. And I think just what we need. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I think for me, it was actually quite an optimistic conversation, identifying a lot of opportunities, but we have to be able to shape them and seize them to allow them to actually help us manage climate security risk going forward. So appreciate the conversation, appreciate all the great questions. Please head to our website, sign up so you can get alerted to our future webinars on these topics. Again, Kasta, Kyungmi, really appreciate you being here, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.